Hello everyone. Hello everyone. That corner. That corner, yeah. And this corner. Okay, this is such a big classroom that it's difficult for anyone to, pay attention to this corner, to the, that corner, and people sitting over there. Really challenging. Huh? It's like a policy challenge, yeah. To have eye on, people sitting in different corners and, understanding what their interests are, and then aligning everyone together is, of course, a policy challenge. Right, wonderful. So we have about an hour and 15 minutes, and we are supposed to talk about public policy making and how, participation plays a role in that process. And particularly, I would say, how we as the students, young citizens of this country could play a role in the in the policy making process. So that's the question, I'm going to address today over next 60, 75 minutes. And I would like to, I will appreciate your attention. If you're not interested in understanding policy process, why should I, be bothered about it? You're free to leave this room, right? If it is about grades, I'll make sure that you get full grades, right? So don't worry about your grades. But if you're not really interested in understanding this piece, then you can use your time in a better way, right? Say, for example, this friend over here. Yeah. Do you have some important work to finish? You're taking notes. Okay, sure. So no worries, and you don't have to, so do you have mobile phones? Yeah, show me. Everyone has a mobile phone, show me. I don't think everyone has a mobile phone. Don't worry, I'm going, yeah. Okay, good. Now what to do? Switch it off. Sorry, I'm not going to ask you to switch it off. Have you installed Google on your phone? Or ChatGPT, or Gemini, or whatever? Have you installed it? Huh? Okay, just open that application. Just open that application and try and find out which policies are being discussed in India today. Which public policies are being discussed in India today? In the parliament, outside parliament, maybe in different states or somewhere else, wherever it is. Which policies are being discussed today in India? Industrial policy, is that what Google telling you? Oh, you didn't Google it. It's your opinion that, it's industrial policy that we are talking about. Which industrial policy we are talking about? Karnataka industrial policy. Very good. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Very good. Any other? So what is Google saying about it? Is Google not able to answer this question? Or you're not searching it? Yes, any answer from this corner? क्या बोल रहा है Google? Which policies are being discussed in India today? Sorry? Foreign trade policy, okay. And from this corner? It's about the power sector. So what about the power sector? Which issue is being discussed? Okay, so Google is telling you about the power sector policies. Okay, good. Then? Vikasit Bharat. Okay. So is that what Google telling you? The Vikasit Bharat is a policy and that is being discussed in India? Okay. That's interesting. We'll come to it. Huh? And? One nation, one election. Is it being discussed now, or was it during the last parliamentary session? December 2024 is what Google telling you, right? So now, what are we discussing in the parliament now? Even the digital policies, okay. Waqf bill, yeah. So Waqf bill is being discussed in the parliament. Okay, good. So I think Google might have given you a little more answers to this question. I expect Google to know little more, and it might have given you, list of policies that we are discussing in the country. So what we are going to, we are going to talk about today is not an academic topic, right? It's not an academic issue, right? It's something which is related to our day-to-day lives, right? It is something which affects our lives, right? Whether it is about industries, whether it is about power sector, whether it is about Waqf board, whether it is about one nation, one election, right? And whatever issues are being discussed in the country today, have discussed in the past, or will be discussed in the future, right? They are not academic issues. They are not theoretical issues, right? We are not talking about theory here, right? What we are going to discuss today is a very, very practical process that takes place around us and influence our lives, irrespective of which discipline you are studying, or even if you are not studying anything, right? Even if you are an illiterate person, even if you are just a farmer, you are a landless person, you are a single woman living in a village, rearing 2 goats, trying to working hard to earn 2,000, 3,000 rupees every month. So even if you are that person, and even if you are a management student, engineering student, political leadership student, whosoever you are, this issue matters to us, right? Each one of us, because it affects us. And therefore, it is important to discuss, the policies in the country and to understand how these policies are made. So next 2 questions is, what is a policy? So ask your friend, Google, ChatGPT, Gemini, whichever friend you trust. So ask your friend, what is a policy? And if you know the answer, you don't have to ask. Right. So policy has a goal, policy has a time frame, right? So government, issues policies, or it make policies which are aligned towards a particular goal, right? Because it wants to, make some change happen, and that's why it introduces a policy. Okay. Any other response from Google, Gemini, ChatGPT? Everyone is looking at their mobiles, but no answers are coming out of, Yes. So what is your friend saying? Right. So policy making is a decision making process. It's a systematic way of setting up guidelines for making decisions. Okay. Any answer from that corner or from this corner? I'm not asking you to answer. I'm asking you to just ask Google. Ask Google, ask ChatGPT, ask Gemini. And then I would like to hear from this corner as well. Simple question, what is the policy? If you ask, if this question to come in your examination, right, and if it was a take-home exam, what you would have liked to do? You would have probably, asked ChatGPT to write a 800-word essay on what is policy. And ChatGPT would have given you a nice essay that you would have reproduced. But that's what the same thing, same thing I'm asking you to do today. Ask ChatGPT, what is a public policy? Or what is a policy? Right. It is what government decides to do or not to do. Okay. Yeah, very good response. Any other? Do you think it's any answer from Google, ChatGPT, Gemini, which says that public policy is a formal, legitimate government document? No? No response like this? So it's not a legitimate document. It's not a formal document. Is it? Is it? Okay, it's a document. Then, are there any responses about people who are involved in this process? Who make public policies? Government bodies, like for example? Government bodies, for example? Parliament? Then? Ministries? Okay. Creating legislative bodies, okay. And what do you mean by legislative bodies? I mean, apart from parliament? Okay, the elected representatives who make laws for the public. Even administrators, okay, good answer. Even administrators make policies, yeah. Okay, interesting. So see, when we come to what is public policy, can we go to the slide 1? Slide, next slide, yeah. So see, okay, next slide. Right, so when you look at what is public policy or what is a policy, it is basically an official document of what governments choose to do. And somebody here said what governments choose not to do, right? So when certain policy is made and certain, course of action is laid down in a document, that document tells you what government has resolved to do, what government wants to do. But at the same time, when government says that, we will be doing this A, B, C, D, right? There is something between the line. There is something which is not said explicitly, right? That means what government does not want, government does not want to do. So both, I mean, policies about what governments choose to do and what governments choose not to do, but not to do part is not mentioned in the documents. It's either between the lines or it's behind the text, right? But it's always there. And we have to be really mindful of it. When we get a policy document and read it, right, we shouldn't read only what is written in the document, but what is missing in the document also. Because not to do something is also a choice. Right? And it's also a policy, and that gets enforced, right? So when government says popcorns will be sold at this price, right, and there will be a GST on popcorns, and for this particular kind of popcorn there will be 5% GST. This particular kind of popcorn there will be 10% GST, and for this kind of popcorn there will be whatever 15, 16, 18% GST. Right? Government says something, but it also doesn't say a lot of things behind it. So we have to be really very cautious about, what is written in the policy document and what is not written in the policy document, what goes behind it. Secondly, it's an instrument designating behaviors to actors, right? It's an instrument, it's a legal instrument which is binding as citizens of this country, as registered firms and entities in this country, as political bodies in this country. Once the policy is made by the government, that policy document is legally binding to all of us, and we are supposed to follow it. So it becomes an instrument for designating behaviors to actors. So now, when the finance minister says, some kind of popcorn will have 18% GST and other kind of popcorn will have only 10% GST, it designates you a behavior. right? Then you choose whether you want to eat this kind of popcorn or that kind of popcorn, right? And it is not written in the policy which sort of popcorn should you eat, right? It's your choice. But because there is GST applicable to it, then that force you to make a choice, right? Make a decision. So a behavior is designated, right? Sometimes policy wants you to behave in a certain manner. So for example, traffic light. When the light goes red, you are supposed to stop, right? You are not supposed to speed your vehicle. So when the rule was made, this behavior was designated. Everyone was supposed to follow. So it's an instrument by which government makes us behave in a certain way. Right? So that is another important thing about the policy. Then it's series of activities, and their results. So once a policy is introduced, then it will also lay down the whole process and series of activities which we have to follow, we're supposed to follow. So it lays down the course of action. Then it basically provides political opportunities to various actors. So when the popcorn policy was made, how many people might have got interested or involved in that discussion? Any idea? When the taxation policy on popcorn was introduced, I mean tax was levied on popcorn, right? How many people or how many kinds of people might have participated in the debate, or might have got attracted towards that discussion? Any idea? There were many, even memes started coming out, right? So certainly there were two political parties, or division of political parties, one thought on the one side and the political parties opposing that thought on the other side. Doesn't matter which party belongs to which segment. But there was a party in rule which made policy, and then there was a party which was doing a critique of this policy. So there were at least two political parties aligned and not aligned with the policy. At least two entities, two actors. Apart from these two political parties or sets of political parties, who else might have got interested? The tax department, finance ministry officials, right? People who impose GSTs, right? People who are responsible to ensure compliance of GST and everything. Popcorn sellers, those who go and watch movies in multiplexes and purchase popcorn during the intervals. So it attracted a lot of people, right? So every policy decision influences set of people, and this set of people, then get interested and they express their opinion. They react to those policies in one form or the other form. But certainly it seeks attention from many people. What are the implications? So whenever a policy is made, there is a purposive action behind that, right? I mean, it was not, there was a thought behind, levying tax on popcorn, whether 5%, 10% or 16, 18%, right? So it was a purposive action. There was a purpose. What was the purpose? Maybe to increase revenue, right? Who knows? Okay. Then, it was a real action. It was not intended one. Right? Finance minister did not say that I wish to levy tax on popcorn. Right? It was not intended action. Policy is not an intended action. Right? So for example, government is saying that we wish to do it in 2028 or 2030. It's not a policy. Right? What is done, what is a real action? What is being made? What is there, right there? Right? It's a real action. As we discussed, no action is also an action. Right? If you're not taking an action, which means you have taken an action, right? Or you have made a choice. Then it's pattern of action and non-actions. It's authoritative and legally coercive. Once a policy is made, right? Once a policy is imposed, then it is legally imposed on you. Right? You cannot deny. You cannot say, no, I don't believe you. Right? You cannot say that, I belong to the party in the opposition. I don't believe in finance minister. Right? I don't agree with the policy. Whether you agree or not agree with the policy, once it is, approved, once it is made, it is legally binding and legally, even coercive. then positive or negative. It could be, positive policies, negative policies, you may like, you may not like, it may have intended impact on you, may not have intended impact on you, doesn't matter, right? It could be anything. And then it will have desired and undesired consequences as well, right? So for example, desired consequences, it might generate some revenue. I mean, the popcorn tax policy might generate some revenue for the government, but also attracted a lot of criticism for the government, right? Which means there is a desired outcome of this policy and there is undesired outcome of the policy also. So, this is how we can summarize what is a public policy. Now, next question is, who all make public policies? Who makes public policies? And you said it's government body. You said it's legislative bodies, right? You said, somebody said administrators also make policies. Can we go to the next slide? Right. So you're right. Policies are made at different levels, right? If you look at this Venn diagram, you could see there are circles within circles, right? And the direction of influence or direction of power is downward or inward, right? Which means the outer circle, the bigger circle, influences the circle inside. So if you look at the top is the constitution, it's the law of the land. And we have certain, principles laid down, fundamental rights mentioned, duties outlined in our constitution, and constitution is also book of rule for the governments to function. Therefore, it's the law of the land, and that is supreme in India. That has to be followed, and every policy made in India has to be aligned with our constitution, right? With our constitutional values, with the preamble of constitution, with fundamental rights, with our duties, and the structure of governance laid down in the constitution. So every policy made in the country has to be aligned with the constitution of India. And it is responsibility of the judiciary. It is responsibility of the courts to ensure. So even if, as you said, policies are made in the parliament, and when legislative bodies approve those policies, right, and then president signs it, and once, the policy is signed by the president, it goes to the court. It goes to the Supreme Court for judicial review of the policy, right? Whether that policy is in line with the constitution or not. And if it is not in line with the constitution, if it is in contradictory to the constitution, that policy is sent back to the parliament or it's discarded by the judiciary. So it has to be aligned with, the law, land of the law. Then comes the judiciary, as I said, then comes the legislation. And whether judiciary comes first or legislation comes first, if there are any law students might want to challenge me, about this Venn diagram. This has been a big debate in India for last 40, 45 years, right? Judiciary has stepped into, it is believed that legislation being, representation of people of this country is supreme, right? Has higher authority than the judiciary, right? But then judiciary has stepped into, the role of legislation many a times. That is called judicial activism, right? Particularly, in 60s, 70s, during emergency, and, even in recent times, sometimes, judiciary has stepped into the legislative powers. So there has been a tussle in India, whether legislation is superior than judiciary, or judiciary has more power over legislation and executives. So that has been a tussle. So you may want to, debate how this diagram is structured, and I wanted you to be aware of it. But yes, because courts have right of judicial review of policies made in India, everything is weighted by them. If they say this policy is not in accordance with the Constitution of India, it goes back to the Parliament. Parliament works on it. And once Parliament says that, no, it is according to the Constitution of India, or this is how we want it, then Supreme Court also has to agree to it. Right? So it's a judicial review. Court does not have a veto. Court cannot say that, a policy made by the Parliament is not aligned with the Constitution and therefore it cannot be enforced, right? Court cannot say that. Court can only say that, look, the policy is not in accordance, is not according to the Constitution, review it. And once government says that we have reviewed it, right, and we feel that, this is how it should be, even the Supreme Court has to agree to it. That's how the process is. Then, after legislation, it comes to executives. Is executive equals to administration? Yes? Okay. Any other opinion? Is executive equals to administration? Okay, let me modify it. Whether executive equals to bureaucracy? No? Who said no? Why? Oh, in the diagram, diagram itself is showing that they are different, right? So then what is executive? Who are the executives? Right. So basically, but bureaucrats also, people who perform actions. So for example, secretaries to a certain level. So they are not executives, right? They're supposed to implement, right? They're not making decisions, executive decisions. So executive decisions in India are made by ministers. Whether it is at the state level or at the national level, executive decisions are made by the ministers. Starts with the prime minister, then with ministers with different ministries, then state ministers. So executive decisions are made by the executives, the ministers. So ministers are the executives. Then it comes to the bureaucracy. Bureaucracy starts from the secretary downwards. Right? Chief secretary is the head of the bureaucracy, and then it starts the downwards. They also make a lot of decisions, but those decisions are not executive decisions. Those decisions are operational decisions. Right? So they are responsible for making operational decisions. Once a policy is made, once the policy is adopted by the parliament, right? Now when it comes to implementing that policy, right, the bureaucrats are responsible for making decisions regarding implementation of policy. Right? Does that mean that they don't have a power? Does that mean they don't have power over policy and they cannot contribute or they cannot influence policy making process in India? Is that so? Okay. So they have power, but they have limited power. It's not the executive power. Right. And what do you mean by that? Can you give us an example?
So as you said, in executive bodies there are ministers, but in bureaucratic there are like those who implement that policy or whatever the laws they are for their implement. Even they have power, but I don't think so. They have the same as the executive power, and even they have just the power to implement or they can formulate the policy, but that policy like it's when its law will be made by the legislative, then it's by the executive, then it's going through them. But
Correct.
they cannot make a law.
Correct. Say, for example, let's talk about popular policy, Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. Right. For example, so Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, once this was announced and it was accepted by the parliament and the program was made, it was an executive decision to launch this program. It was an executive decision to to provide a budget for it. How much money should be spent on it. So bureaucrats cannot take decision on how much money should be allocated for implementation of Swachh Bharat in India. Right? So decision regarding how Swachh Bharat should be implemented, how much money should be spent on it, which states, which cities should be prioritized, which initiatives should be promoted, all those decisions are taken by the executives. Of course, bureaucrats do a lot of homework, they put forth proposals, they help ministers make decision, but they are not in the decision-making seats. They're not supposed to make decisions about it. It's the finance minister who decides how much money can be spent on Swachh Bharat, in the following year. But once the budget is allocated, right, then it comes to the executive, the Secretary of Finance, right, to allocate money to different states and different activities, and then, to the junior bureaucrats who then, do procurement, get tenders, make sure that, the activity toilets are constructed and et cetera, so and so forth. So this is how it happens, yes. Yeah, but they can make operational decisions. Say, for example, once it is decided to make toilets in India, say, 50 public toilets in Pune, where to make those 50 public toilets will not be considered by the minister. Right? It will be considered by the commissioner of the Pune Municipal Corporation. Right? It will not go to the minister. Informal process. In informal political process, yes, bureaucratic decisions can be, and most of the time, are influenced by the political forces also. Right? But in terms of the procedure, where to construct a toilet in Pune will not be considered by the minister. Right? It will be considered by the appropriate authority of a concerned department working at the Pune Municipal Corporation. Right? That's the executive decision making, or sorry, that's the bureaucratic decision making. That's administrative decision making. The decisions are not made. Every decision is not made at the executive level. That's what I'm trying to say. Right? There are different types of decisions, and those decisions are made at different levels. Then, the implementation agencies. It could be institutions or even individuals. And when it comes to individual, if you are from a rural area, how many of you are from a village, a tribal village, a rural village? How many of you are from villages? I am. 1, 2, that's it? 3, 4, 5. Okay, good. So in villages, there are Anganwadi Sevikas and public health workers, teachers, preschool attendants. So there are a lot of government staff working at the village level, right? They are called street bureaucrats, or even in cities, right? If you look at, the people that work with municipal corporations at the ward level, right? They are called street level bureaucrats. They are also functionaries in the government system, and they influence how policies are implemented. Right? So, for example, once a PHC, what is PHC? What is PHC? Yeah, you. What is PHC? Anybody here knows what is a PHC stands for? Primary Health Center. Yeah. So, primary health center. So once, say for example, the set of medicines is delivered to the primary health center, right? So Government of India has a policy called Ayushman Bharat, right? It's a program, right? Through this program, several medical provisions are made, health provisions are made. Those health provisions, then implemented by the national level and state level, district level, bureaucrats across this ladder. And finally, a bunch of medicines, reaches to the PHC, the primary health center, right, which is there for every few villages. And then nurses or ANMs, who are the health workers at the village level, are supposed to use these medicines, in the village, take it to people, right? So whether, how efficient this person is, to whom she supports with this medicine and to whom she does not support with the medicines, right, and why, also influences how Ayushman Bharat is implemented at the grassroots level. Right? And therefore, even this last mile functionary in the process, the last person who is responsible to deliver a policy, who is responsible to implement a policy at the last mile, right, also influences how policies work in India. Right? Rather, they are the frontliners. They work with the people directly, and therefore they are more responsible. Unfortunately, we make least investment in these people. They are often less qualified, right? They are less capacitated. They are less paid. They have several challenges to face with, right? But they are at the forefront. They are responsible for taking your policies to people eventually. So, for example, teacher who is teaching in a school in a tribal village. That tribal village might have just one school, one teacher school, who is teaching, 20, 25, 30 students, but those 30 students are future of India. And we have this national education policy, right? And who implements that policy boils down ultimately to this teacher, right? The infrastructure of the school, and how those students are made to come to school and how they are maintained in the school. So this last mile people are extremely important in influencing these policies, and often these people contribute to policy. So if you look at policy as a piece of paper, If you look at, I mean, if you say policy is a piece of paper published by the parliament, right? Then, these different people, they don't have any role to play. But if policy is a process, right, then, these people, they have, a role to play at each stage. And therefore, policies in India are, although they are made at the parliament or assemblies, those policies are also designed on the tables of the bureaucrats at national and state level, at district level, and then they're delivered by the functionaries at the last mile. And therefore, the policy process in India depends on different stakeholders, different actors who are part of this process. Can we go to the next slide? Now, these are all, official policy makers. They are all, the member of parliaments are elected, prime minister is elected, right? Judiciary is appointed through a democratic process. Bureaucrats are recruited by UPSCs, right? Even the state level, district level, village level cadres are, recruited through a process, formal process. They have formal mandate, right? They have powers to do some work, right? Different levels of powers, but they have powers to do work. So they are all formal actors in the policy process. Apart from this formal actors, there are a lot of informal actors also who take part in the policy process and who influence the policy. Now, who are these people? The informal actors, right? So, basically the interest groups, right? People who are interested in a particular policy. So you talked about, Karnataka's industrial policy. Was it a complete government initiative? Was it proposed by the minister himself or herself, right? Or was there a body of people, lobbying for it, demanding for it? I'm sure if you study that policy-making process carefully, you would find that the industrialists in Karnataka might have had some problems, right? And they wanted to have some solution to those problems. And therefore, they might have influenced, the government and the minister to design this policy and introduce it, right? So initiative could come from different informal groups also, and they are the interest groups. So if it is about industrial policy, the industrialist in that state definitely has a stake in that process. If the policy is about farmers, say for example, these 3 farmers' laws that were introduced by the current government in 2014-15 and which could not get through, had a lot of, the criticism and opposition from farmer unions. So farmer unions are the interest groups. They came forward, they expressed their resentments, their disagreement about the policy, they protested, and they said they influenced the policy. The policy could not come through. Right? The government had to withdraw that policy. Dada, ते बंद करा ना मोबाईल. मी तुम्हीच जर असं करायला लागला तर काय करणार पोर? So, so that is about the interest groups. Then there are political parties. The political party which is in power, right, which is ruling, and political parties which are not in power. It could be, the parties in power doesn't have to be just one party. It could be a coalition of parties also. So there could be, parties which are in power and parties which are not in power. Parties which are not in power are generally considered parties in opposition, right? So they are supposed to look at the government policies more carefully, criticize them, right? Bring in, people's voices to the parliament and influence policy process. So both the parties, political parties which are in power, they also try and understand people's requirements, demands, their voters go to them, and they bring in certain policy issues to the parliament for discussion. Say, for example, the Waqf issue is being discussed in the parliament at the moment, right? So that was brought in by the government, by party, which is ruling at the moment. And then there are political parties which have been criticizing this rule, this bill, and they are, talking against it, or they are criticizing it, they are bringing forth some suggestions on it, feedback on it. So the political parties, are the other interest groups which play a lot of role in policy formulation because, even before it reaches the parliament. Right? When the bill is, put on the table for discussion in the parliament, the formal discussion starts on it. But there is a whole process before that, before bill gets to the parliament. So political parties has a lot of role to play, and they do influence this process even before the bills are tabled, after bills are tabled, and even after policies are adopted by the government. Right. So, the political parties can keep criticizing policies even after they are introduced. So they inform the implementation of policies later on. So, for example, Agniveer. Right. The parliament had a lot of debate about Agniveer. Agniveer was adopted, it was enacted by the government, and after it was enacted, the debate continued, and party in the opposition kept talking about the Agniveer and, kept challenging the government in the parliament, especially about the 2024 election results, right? Because they thought they got more credibility, and with the renewed credibility, they brought this issue in the parliament again. So, the political parties don't leave, the issues once the policies are made or once policies are adapted by the government. Political parties keep discussing those policies again and again and again. Then individual citizens, and people like you and me, not always. These days we are busy with Instagram and Facebook and YouTube and, a lot of things. So we don't get chance to, really look at the policies, what is being discussed in the parliament, what is my opinion about it, and we hardly express our opinion, in a formal process. So we, while having conversations with friends, we might, express our opinion sometime here and there, but we hardly get into the formal political process of giving feedback. So before every policy is made, the concerned ministry, once the draft is ready, it publishes that draft and call for public feedback on it, public opinion on it. And every citizen in India is, can, go to the website, read that draft, provide any number of suggestions. Then this ministry is supposed to compile those suggestions, form a report basis on them, put that report in the parliament, have a discussion on the feedback given by the citizens of this country, and parliament is supposed to deliberate it. It's not mandatory to the government to, accept every suggestion given by the citizens of this country, but it is mandatory to have discussion on the suggestions given by the citizens, and the policies should be informed by it. A lot of, almost every policy came for discussion. And then there are interest groups, as I said, civil society organizations, movements, people who are inclined towards those issues. They, of course, look at the policies when they're in the draft phase, share their feedback, share their views on it. They get reflected. This is a formal process. But, each one of us can bring about a change, and a very, very significantly. Did any one of you face beating by teachers while you were in schools? Who? Okay. Which standard? How old you were at that time? 10th standard. Okay. All of your childhood. Okay. Right. It's very uncommon in your generation. Right. There are one or two examples who said, yes, I was physically beaten by the teacher, when I was in the school. For my generation and generations older than me, it was a very, very common practice. It was a very common practice to, have physically beaten by teachers almost every class for one or the other reason, almost every day. And that practice was then stopped by a policy. Right. Yeah, it's very strict, and the policy said that, this will be considered as a criminal act. Right? And a criminal case will be filed, criminal case. It will be considered a criminal act, and criminal case will be filed against the teacher. Right? And so this policy was made. Deliberately it was made. How was it made? Does anyone know about it? How was it made? What led to, this policy? A girl student studying in 8th standard was beaten up by her teacher. She wrote a letter to a justice of Supreme Court of India. He considered that letter as a plea, as a petition. He heard the case, he made a ruling, and this law was introduced. I mean, this policy was introduced that beating in schools will be considered a criminal act. So that's the power of, the structure that I showed you on the previous slide. Right? These are not only circles within circles, with the constitution being the largest circle influencing circles underneath. Right? They're not just the circles within circles. There's a lot of meaning. So that even one girl student, studying in 8th standard, if she wishes, if she wants, she could reach out to the justice of the Supreme Court of this India, Supreme Court of India, and he acted on it. How was Right to Education Act was introduced? RTE. Are you familiar with RTE? Right to Education Act? I'm sure all of you have benefited from it. Not benefited? Okay, in terms of content. Yeah, but in terms of facilities and services, yes. All of you have benefited from it in one form or the other form. How was it made? Any idea? It went through a really long process. Right? And I'm going to show you, different stages of that process. Not that particular case, but the stages. पीछे और पीछे और पीछे और no, that table one. It was a really long process, and it involved all the stages of policy making process, which I'm going to talk to you about, and this will be my last point. But the process started when a medical student, first year medical student, if I'm not wrong, from Bihar or Indore, I guess, right, if I'm not wrong, she was studying in a medical college in Karnataka, and suddenly the fees were increased by the authority, and she said, I cannot afford these fees. My parents cannot afford these fees. And the then institute said, we cannot enroll you if you're not able to pay the fees. She said, it's my fundamental right to learn. You cannot deny it. And then, she raised a case, initially in Karnataka High Court, then it went to the Supreme Court, right? And, the ruling came in her favor, and then there was a follow-up case by some other student, right? And, the ruling came in favor of the student, and then it triggered the movement. Then a lot of civil society organizations, they came together, they deliberated, they set the agenda, they demanded for a formal right, formal law, acknowledging this right. It's a constitutional right, but it was not acknowledged formally. So through a law. So that law was demanded, and then eventually that law, got passed, and now we have a right to education. Now, if you look at the policy making process, with the example of right to education or any other example, it has the 6 stages. The first stage is problem identification. Right? There, somebody should feel a problem. If you think, we are a perfect country, we are a perfect nation, we don't have any problems, right? We are just about to be Vishwaguru and, the superpower. And it's just a matter of time. It's going to happen in another 10, 15 years, and we don't have to take any cautious steps towards it. We don't have to be critical about our own, country, culture, practice, life. We don't have to be critical about it. There are no problems in this country. Everything is well and fine. Then no additional policy can come in place. Right? It's not possible. So, the policy process starts with identification of a problem. And anyone can, have the problem and identify that problem. So that problem identification is important. And this problem identification is often done by the interest groups, mass media, concerned citizens, through public opinion, the problem is understood, problem is realized that there is a problem, right? And this problem needs to be solved. Then, agenda setting. For example, in case of Waqf, now government is saying that a lot of real estate, a lot of land is with the Waqf boards, and if that land is consolidated, right, a lot of money can be raised, and that money could be used for education of Muslim children, right, which has been deprived for last so many years. That's one of the arguments, right? So it's considered as a problem, and therefore government wants to have a legislation about it. Now, whether that problem is credible, whether it is authentic or not, right, whether other political parties support it or not, whether society as a whole support it or not, is a different question. But the problem is identified by someone, and that triggered the policy process, right? Then it becomes the agenda setting, not just identifying problem and you and me identify some problem, right? I mean, we face problems every day, right? So we could, have a long list of problems and demand a policy, right? It doesn't happen like that usually in political scenario. Sometime when this girl child writes to the, Justice of India, and he, suo moto takes action on it, hear the case, and, gives the ruling, that's a different story. But in normal political process, the problem has to be converted, into an agenda. And this agenda setting is often done by media, it's done by elites, ministers, legislatures, and political parties, right? Somebody up there should hear you, understand that problem, and, convert it into an agenda, convert it into a demand. Once the demand is set, once the agenda is set, then the policy is formulated. Then someone should come forward with a solution. Problem has been identified, problem has got traction, it's in media, it's, political parties are discussing it, citizens are discussing it, right? Everybody is aware of it. Now somebody should come forward with solution. Who comes with solution? Then, again, there are parliamentary committees, government secretariats, interest group, think tank, research organizations, even academic institutions sometimes, through their interested faculties who are interested in those processes, they often come up with their publications, reports, and those reports help articulate the problem as well as propose some solutions. So somebody has to propose the solutions. So there are a lot of think tanks which are working, on that part. Once the policy is formulated, once the draft is there, sometimes model policies are also made. Before it reaches to the political arena, before it reaches to the parliament, policies are drafted by think tanks as model policies. Right? This is what we would like to have in our country. Part of it then reaches to the political arena. Once it reaches to the political arena, then then the parliament selects one proposal. So now in case of Waqf board, there will be several proposals put forth by the government, right, or by different political parties. Some of those proposals will be accepted, or agreed upon, rejected. That process will take place in the parliament. But that process is necessary, and that process is called process of adoption, policy adoption. Policy has to be adapted. So now you see, problem is identified. It's got traction. It's converted into demand. That demand, then have a proposal of solution. This proposal of solution is discussed in the parliament or in, policy making house. And, then it gets political support. It is enacted into the law. And finally, it gets the constitutionality of it. Right? So there is this legislative process that happens. Different ministers, prime ministers, legislature, court, as I said, they participate in this process, and formally the policy is adopted. Once the policy is adopted, then it goes for the implementation by bureaucrats, as we discussed. And there is a very important, step in between. Once a law is made, it's responsibility of the parliament to make the law, not the implementation guidelines always. And that is the bottleneck in policy implementation in India. Many good policies, progressive policies, even after they were made, the rules were not designed. Guidelines were not drafted. Now how am I supposed to implement this policy? Unless government comes forward and gives us a guideline or gives us a set of rules, bureaucrats say that, I cannot implement this policy. So for example, the NREGS, National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, the very popular scheme, which gives guarantee of 100 days of employment to every family which asks for it. It's a guaranteed employment by the government. This law came in around 2006, I guess, but the rules were made much later. Right? The Forest Act, right? It came in 2006. Rules were made in 2012. Panchayat Raj extension to tribal areas, PESA, very progressive policy. It was made in late 90s. Some states are yet to make rules and guidelines to implement that law. So making policy does not mean getting law passed by the parliament. Right? Once the law is passed by the parliament, there has to be rules and regulations and guidelines to help implement that law. Unless government make those laws, and it is the responsibility of concerned ministry. Once the law is passed, parliament's job is done. Then it's the responsibility of the executives, concerned ministries, and its approval by the cabinet ministers, right, to have guidelines, procedures, rules to implement that policy. In our country, unfortunately, these two processes are considered a bit isolated, and it takes time. So for example, lately, towards the end of last tenure, the government made a very interesting policy in the interest of women of this country. Which one? Giving 2,500 rupees was a decision of the government of Maharashtra. I'm talking about the national government, central government. Central government, in their previous term, they made an interesting law concerning women of this country. Regarding, yeah. Correct. No, she answered it. So they made a law regarding women participation in parliament. Right. So X number of seats in parliament will be reserved for women candidates only. So from certain constituencies across country, only women can contest. So that women get elected from that constituency, and there will be sizable representation of women in the parliament. So that law has been made. Last 2024 or 23, right? 24 probably, or end of 23. But government said it will be implemented in 2029, right? So having a policy adopted by the parliament doesn't necessarily mean that it will be implemented immediately after that. There are either legislative, issues regarding legislative will, or issues regarding administrative bottlenecks, or delays in getting guidelines and the rules developed. But having policy approved by the parliament doesn't necessarily mean it will be implemented. Right? It will be enacted. So that implementation process becomes really very important, and PMO, Prime Minister's Office, plays a very, very critical role in ensuring that policies which are adopted by the parliament are implemented. Because starting the implementation is the responsibility of concerned ministry, and each ministry is supposed to work under the guidance of the Prime Minister's Office. So role of Prime Minister's Office becomes extremely important in doing. And then the evaluation of policies. The last stage in the policy process is to see whether policies which are being implemented are giving desired results, whether they have been impactful or not. Right? If not, why not? What are the challenges? Right? So that has to be measured every year. So that is called policy evaluation. Policy evaluation is done both internally, externally. Internally means by the government agencies themselves. They have their own MIS, their data. That data is compiled, that is looked at block level, district level. The secretary sitting in Mumbai, they have video conferencing call with district collectors and chief executive officers. They review data on, frequently, and they keep steering their actions accordingly. So the internal monitoring and internal evaluation by government is always there. But there are external agencies also, as I said, the think tanks or civil society organizations. they do studies. They do evaluation studies. They understand, how effectively the policies are implemented, whether they are leading to their desired results or not. One popular example is ASR. How many of you are familiar with ASR report? What is ASR report? Have you heard of it? How many of you have heard about the ASR report? Yeah. What is it about? You are not aware of what is ASR, but you have heard of ASR. Yeah. What is ASR? Anybody else? Okay. Huh? Yeah, it is about education. But what does it do? It evaluates standard of learning of students, primary and secondary students across the country. Right? And they look at only two things. Whether students are able to read, right, and whether they are able to do math. Right? Mathematics and reading. Just two capabilities. But they have very interesting scale. Right? So they look at whether a student in the 5th standard is able to read curriculum for, say, 2nd standard. Whether a student studying in the 5th standard is able to do a math which she was supposed to be able to do in 3rd standard. Right? And that's how they measure the impact of schooling in India. And they come up with this report every year. Very interesting document. Right? It's an organization which publishes this report every year, and that report has been a guiding report for looking at how education in India is progressing. And then, of course, then there are different organizations, interest groups who do evaluation studies and comment on performance of policies. Even academic institutions do a lot of policy study, and they come up with the recommendations for the government. But evaluation is the last stage of the policy process. Now, I'll take another 3 minutes, and then I'll stop. At what stage can you play a role in this process? A lot of time, when I talk about policy making, people ask me, it's the parliamentary affair. Right? In my lifetime, I'm not going to be there. Right? I'm not going to be the member of parliament at all. That's not my passion. That's not my dream. Right? So, how can I contribute to it? Yeah. So as a civil servant, good, that's your choice, right? So you can be a member of parliament. I'm not saying that you cannot be. I'm saying that I'm not passionate about it. I don't like it to be there, right? But you can be, right? So if you are passionate about it, aspire to be a member of parliament, participate in the political process, and that's what we need. We want young people to be there, young, intelligent people to be there. So participate in that process, of course. If you want to be in judiciary, go. If you want to be in bureaucracy, go for civil services. Right? If you want to be an implementation agency, do it. But apart from that, you can also join think tanks. Organizations which do study. I mean, if someone of you is interested about quality of education in the country, you should start your internship with ASR from next year or this year. Right? That's the avenue for you. That will launch you in the policy process. Or if you are activist kind of a person, you can join an interest group. If you want to, work in the interest of farmers, right, go work with Yogendra Yadav or somebody else, who is opposing him. Right. That is how, you can participate in this process. That's where you can start. So for you, there are two roles, academically speaking, and talking about your careers also. So there are two career prospects, apart from, getting into the formal structure. So one option is, of course, to get into the formal structure, being member of parliament, being member of judiciary, being, a civil servant, being an implementer. So getting into the formal structure is one option available to you always. You can choose to be there. Apart from that, right, there are two other options. One is to be a policy analyst. Policy analyst is essentially a researcher who researches policies, right? But it's a science in itself. So you can specialize in that science, right? Be a policy analyst and join think tanks or consulting organizations. Right from Deloitte and EY and this big four consulting companies in India to organizations like organizations which produce reports like ASR, you can be part of that work stream and be a professional, a policy professional, a policy entrepreneur. Second option is to be a policy advocate and an activist. There is no future for activists in India now, right? But if you are really concerned about some issue, and if you want to stand in solidarity with farmers, for example, right, then go and join them. Stand along with them. Fight for the policies in their interest. That option is always there. Right? Not very financially rewarding, but that option is always there if you have that kind of a personality. Right? Third option is to be a policy entrepreneur. Understand policy process carefully. Have your own startup. Choose problem areas which are important to you, and try and accelerate policy process around those problem areas in the country. You know the process, right? It's about agenda setting. It's about getting policies formulated. It's about getting policies adopted. It's about getting policies implemented. It's about getting policies evaluated. You can be your own startup. Be a policy entrepreneur. You can say that I will evaluate policy implementation, implementation of agricultural policies in this country, and that is what my startup does. It's a research work, but research in policy. So being a policy entrepreneur is the third option that you always have open for you. So these are the career avenues which are available in this space, and that is how you can participate in the process. I hope I was able to give you at least an overview of what policy is, how it is made, who make it, and what role can you play in this process. That was the objective of this session. If you have any questions, I'll take them for next 5 minutes, and then we can stop. Any questions? All enlightened. Okay, I would like to ask you a question. How many of you would like to be something called policy entrepreneurs? I don't claim that you would have learned the idea of policy entrepreneurship in this 1 hour session, but just listening to this phrase, policy entrepreneur, how many of you would like to be policy entrepreneurs? Okay, can you just raise the hands?
But after settling in life.
That's okay, yeah. That's okay. That we can take care of. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Would be happy to have a coffee with you, if you like. Right? If you like, some evening, would like to have a coffee with you, my number is available with sir. Thank you so much. Thank you.
आपने बोला कि इम्प्लीमेंटेशन के लिए जो है पीएमओ, कंसर्न मिनिस्ट्री और कंसर्न एग्जीक्यूटिव डिपार्टमेंट एजेंसी एंड एजेंसी जो भी होते हैं, लेकिन सर हमें ऐसा लगता है कि जो तमाम सारे के मंत्रालय हैं, कहीं ना कहीं पीएमओ के जो ऑफिसर्स होते हैं कहीं ना कहीं कंट्रोल करके रखते हैं। उनकी जो एक्सपर्ट होती है वो कहीं ना कहीं उसकी एक्सपर्टी को मतलब अपने इम्प्लीमेंटेशन में ना रख करके मतलब उनको इग्नोर करते हैं सर। तो आपको लगता है कहीं ना कहीं ये पास जो है हमारे पॉलिसी में कुछ दिक्कत आ सकती है, आपके इस तरह की दिक्कतें भी होती रहती हैं? ऐसा लगता है सर कि जो है ना जो मंत्रालय को सर उनको आज़ादी भी नहीं मिल रही, सब पीएमओ उनको मतलब कैप्चर कर रहा है। क्योंकि हमने इसको फील किया, अभी दिल्ली में थे तो काफ़ी सारे मिनिस्ट्री से मिले, तो मुझे ये एहसास हुआ सर इस चीज़।
Sure. आपका नाम प्रकाश या प्रशांत?
प्रशांत.
Listen. Excuse me. One question from Prashant here. He heard me saying that the Prime Minister's office play a key role in policy making process because all ministries have to work under his or her guidance, the Prime Minister's guidance, and therefore the PMO's role becomes really critical. So he's asking, looking at the current scenario, is PMO's role really facilitating policy formulation in India, or it is hindering policy formulation, by giving or not giving freedom to respective ministries? Right? It seems that the Prime Minister is all the more powerful, and he is influencing policy making in India in his authority than giving, more autonomy to his ministers. That's his question. More than question, I would say it's an observation, right, or an opinion. And a lot of people believe in this. From whatever I have read, whatever I have listened to from different people, yes, the PMO has become a central entity in decision making in India, and it's more powerful than ever, in our parliamentary process as such, compared to Indira Gandhi's time. Maybe it's better, I don't know. But it has become central, right? And it plays an influential role. I think you need to understand one thing, from policy making point of view. So it is important to understand how policy decisions are made. Which decision making styles are used. That is very important to understand. So if you look at it, the first policy making style is persuasion. Right, convincing person, if there is an opponent or a party in opposition not convinced about my proposal, right, then pursuing that person and, getting him or her on our side is one style of making decisions in policy arenas or making policies. Second one is bargaining, having some give and take with the opponents, with people with different views. And, through that give and take, then a mutually agreed policy comes up. Right. In the first style of decision making, persuasion, the leader is charismatic. The leader is so influential that, when he or she reaches to the opponent and, try and convince, is able to convince without compromising on his or her or her party's interest. And, if you look at the literature, many recent movies, you would see several examples of how Indira Gandhi or Atal Bihari Vajpayee, when they were prime ministers, they did a lot of persuasion, reached out to opponents and convinced them, even Manmohan Singh, about the economic policy when he was in his first term, right? A lot of persuasion was done around that time. So that is one, style of decision making followed by policymakers, especially, when they're at the powerful positions. Other style is bargaining. Right, if opponent is, in a position and it's not possible to convince the opposition, right, then, they do bargaining. There is some give and take and some commonly agreed or mutually agreed proposal, then accepted. So that bargaining, negotiation is another style of decision making which, brings out a policy, but the policy reflects interest of both the parties or all the parties, right? And that can be seen in the policy document very clearly when you read it. Many a times, both these processes happen silently, right? They don't come on media screens. They are not published in newspapers, right? We come to know about, these processes only after someone writes the memoir or somebody's biography is written or some movie comes out. But these processes do happen. The third style is the command style. Authoritative style. When leader, when there is a hierarchical relationship, right, and, those who are in the superior position, they make decisions on their own. And, by using sanctions, by using rewards and punishments, by using rewards and penalties, if you don't listen to me, right, I'll give you a punishment, right, I will penalize you. If you listen to me, I will give you a better ministry next time. Right, so this reward and penalizing mechanisms are used to influence ministers, even officers, and that's how policies are made in a command and control style. So current PMO's style of operation, I'm not saying Prime Minister's style of operation, but PMO style of operation is considered as a command control style of operation. That does not mean they are not doing bargaining and persuasion. Often bargaining and persuasion happens behind the screens. But these are the three styles of decision making used by different political leaders and decision makers. So when we make opinions and when we hear from people, we come to know or we learn about one of the discourses. But if you're a policy analyst, you should pay an attention towards, whether there has been some persuasion, bargaining, or command control in the decision-making process. You will see a reflection of all of them, a mix of it.